Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, well, welcome back. Let's go around and say our names. My name is Jim.
I'm Adam.
My name is Henry.
Amos.
David.
Philip. I'm Kay.
My name is Michael.
Nicholas.
John.
John.
Doug.
Fred.
Dennis.
Dan. Laura.
Tony.
Michael.
Jerry.
David.
Mark.
My name is Jerry.
I'm Patrick.
George.
Isa.
Jack.
David.
Jim.
My name is Brian. My name is Tage.
Hal. Peter.
Jose.
Len. That's Jerry.
Jerry.
Well, today we're fortunate to have one of our own, Bob McMullin, speak. Bob started coming to GBF early in 2008 at the invitation of Tom Bruein and left early in 2009 to go to work at the Abbey of New Clairvaux, north of Chico. He returned to San Francisco in 2011 to work as development director of Raphael House on Sutter Street, but that relationship ended early because of budget constraints. He may or may not now be entering the first stages of an unanticipated retirement. We wish him well with that. Tom was the president of the board of directors of Stop AIDS Project when Bob first went to work for them as executive director. Tom Bruein and he connected immediately around their mutual interest in things internal and spiritual. Like many GBF, Bob grew up in a devout Christian environment and even attended seminary for 2 years after college. His departure from seminary started a voyage of self-discovery and spiritual exploration that continues to this day. Bob will be speaking to us this morning about the origins and history of New Year's and its potential significance for us today as spiritual pilgrims. Welcome, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go on a little bit of a journey with this, my own journey, the journey that I usually pick when I start thinking about things that are that go into exploring the other. New Year's, I think, thinking about it immediately, seems like of all of our holidays, perhaps the one that's the least takes us to any special place in where we are. But as a matter of fact, its origins probably make it a logical candidate for one of the most spiritual holidays of the year. New Year's, with its emphasis on romance and indulgence, in some ways seemed like an illogical candidate. The Romans celebrated New Year's with 6 days of carousing, and in the 8th century, Saint Boniface was appalled by the exhibition he saw when he visited Rome of the celebration of the calends, the origin of our word calendar, at the first part of January. But as a matter of fact, it's perhaps if the oldest, if not one of the oldest holidays that we celebrate during the course of the year. It's the winter solstice, the turning of the year, and the beginning of days, viewed as the birth of the year, the lengthening of the days, and the return of the sun. And in our Christian traditions, the birth of the Son of God. And as many of you are probably aware, the adoption of December the 25th as the date of Jesus' birth was a sort of connecting Jesus' birth with the birth of other sons of God of other religions that were present in Roman times, notably the god Mithras from the Zoroastrian tradition in Persia. Mithras was also the son of God, died and rose again from the dead in order to provide redemption for people. So it was a sort of a natural a combination of religious traditions. Even though Christians, even at that time, knew that Jesus was indeed not born on the 25th, but as you know, the 25th is often recognized as the winter solstice. The period of leading up to New Year's in our tradition, leading up to December the 25th, is not unlike the traditions in other religions. As a matter of fact, even in Judaism, the celebration of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are very similar to the way New Year's was in the past, and to a certain degree continues to be celebrated. The sort of a house cleaning, paying off of old debts, dealing with slights that have been created that need to be addressed, and reflecting on mistakes that have been made, making repayments so that life can begin anew in the new year, and whatever preparations are made are supposed to be finished by New Year's Eve. So on the beginning of the new year, one begins afresh and can make what, of course, in our current traditions are New Year's resolutions. For us, they're often simpler things like going on a diet or starting going back to the gym. But in earlier times, they were perhaps slightly more spiritually based than they are today. Everything in New Year's Day, however, is freighted with significance for the future. The American custom of spending the night with one we love and kissing them at midnight ensures that the relationship will flourish as it goes into the future. I was interested to discover, isn't the internet a wonderful thing? You can find all kinds of things very quickly that you would have had to spend weeks researching if you even went to the Library of Congress. But I found, as most of us know, the Gregorian calendar has New Year's January the 1st, so the beginning of the year is indeed January the 1st. But for us in the Western world, as a matter of fact, that's a relatively recent thing. Even in England, until 1751 in England and Wales, New Year's was March the 25th, which is one of 4 quarter days during the course of the year. And from that time forward, however, it was moved to January the 1st. And of course, today we celebrate January the 1st as New Year's. And so I decided to take this as a launching off point, if you will, for looking at the meaning in our life of myth, or events, activities that take place in our life that we use to create meaning in our life. So, New Year's being obviously the fact that we're entering the winter solstice has no real significance. It may indeed have had real significance for people in ancient times, but today we don't we don't attribute any significance to the winter solstice other than the fact that that is the day that we arbitrarily have selected to come to terms with where we have been and where we want to go. There were a couple of movies that I saw recently that really drew attention to me to the ways that we deal with myth in our own culture today. One of them was The Life of Pi. I don't know if you saw it. And also the movie Lincoln, in very different ways. But in Life of Pi, the fact that somebody builds this very elaborate story about something that happened to him that was transformational. Part of his family died. He had to go through this incredible journey of survival and discovery, and the real story was a little prosaic. And so the original story that he tells is this very elaborate story about being trapped on a boat with a tiger and other zoo animals. And then at the end of the film, he reveals, well, no, as a matter of fact, that wasn't the actual story, but that's the way the story began to represent itself. And I read recently, and I thought it was interesting that, not surprisingly, that some evangelical Christian writer took exception to it because it was suggesting that that myth was as significant as things that really occurred, such as the life of Christ. And suggesting that the thing that made Christianity meaningful was the fact that all these events actually took place the way they were described in the Bible. I think that I would suggest that writer actually totally missed the point, and that is that what really is significant is the meaning of those events in our lives, not what might actually have occurred. And similarly, in the movie Lincoln, one of the things that demonstrates about him that is something that I think is in some ways very characteristic of the culture that I grew up in. My family was Scottish, and storytelling was something that had a great significance, that the way you imparted information or knowledge was by telling stories. Some of those stories would be about members of the family, but as often as not, they wouldn't be. And that the way you taught children how to live their lives and how to grow up was through telling stories. And in the film Lincoln, they show that Lincoln used that method, that when a problem would be presented, he always had a story to tell that illustrated what the appropriate direction was to take. And that these stories, these myths, if you will, were the vehicle towards greater insight, greater knowledge, greater spiritual depth. And I think that the concept of myth is something that is difficult for us today because in our contemporary 21st century secular world, we tend to think that there is some sort of value or preference for things as they actually occurred, that the reality has greater value than mythology, than things that are didn't occur or have been twisted in some way throughout history. And I think that one of the reasons, I think for myself at any reason, one of the reasons why I often go there is because I grew up in a religious tradition where the myths were identified as reality. And so in coming to terms with rediscovering the mythology behind all of those traditions, it was very difficult for me to come up with an appropriate balance. Something that we read a lot about today in psychological studies is that as a matter of fact, even in our own lives, things that we think of as being reality, memories that we have, actual memories that we have, they're not really memories of anything that the way it actually occurred. They may be memories of the way a story was told to us, or a way that we have changed it in order to have it comply with an image that we have of ourselves or our image of reality. And so that mythology is a part of who we are, that our memories are myths, they're not even reality. And so that dividing line between reality and mythology becomes blurred. And in a couple of other ways that's even demonstrated in the Christian tradition, Jesus very notably spoke in parables very often. He rarely talked about do this, do that. He generally spoke in terms of this was a man, this was a woman, and this happened, and this was the result of what occurred. That his tradition was also one of making it clear that that myth was a very rich resource that we had to impart to each other the values of life, the truth of life. And so the sort of final conclusion that I come to all this is that what is truth? Is truth something that actually exists, or do we even know what actually occurred, what events actually occurred? Something that occurred to me often during the course of the recent political campaign was a lot of the stuff that we heard from either side of the campaign about what happened and the results of what happened, and the sudden realization that there is no such thing as truth anymore. Well, not anymore. There never has been any such thing as truth, and that however we use the assumption that there is some such thing as truth in order to try to gain an advantage over each other, or to try to control a situation. And in the recent political campaign, it really didn't make any difference on us to a certain level on what side of the issues one happened to be. That you ended up realizing that you really didn't have a really clear grasp on whether or not the Obama campaign was telling the truth, that they were telling the truth that they wanted people to internalize. In other words, they were sharing myths, that they were sharing the values, if you will, the direction, the truth, perhaps not in terms of what actually occurs, but the direction that that particular political party intended to go, and that those were the things that we were being encouraged to internalize. And I'd like to, so from this, I'd like to get a little personal, if I may, in terms of our own community and how that has had an impact on our community. For those of us who have been around since the beginning, if you will, since Stonewall, or since even before Stonewall. I came out 5 years before Stonewall, and suffice it to say, in my lifetime and the lifetime of most of you in this room, we have been able to see a change, if we will, in reality, what the nature of same-sex orientation means has gone through a 180-degree change from a point where it was something that was identified by the American Psychological Association as a mental illness, to a place where currently we're talking about same-sex marriage. It seems. As a matter of fact, I was just reading someplace recently that it is, and it probably has a lot to do with a lot of the campaigns that went on before it, such as the Civil Rights Campaign and Women's Rights Campaign. But the speed with which these changes have taken place is literally is pretty overwhelming, and in a way almost unsettling. I find for myself that they're a little unsettling. It's not that I'm unprepared to accept same-sex marriage. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I celebrate it for people who are going to go there. I'm not sure it's something that I want to embrace. For me, it means a lot. It has a lot to do with embracing a middle-class morality system, and I'm not sure I'm really prepared to do quite yet. I'm probably, at this stage in my life, I probably never will be prepared to deal with. But be that as it may, the fact that these changes have occurred, what has really changed? Of course, nothing has changed. Certainly, I think that we could acknowledge our behavior hasn't changed all that much in the interim period. Perhaps, indeed, the AIDS epidemic had both positive and negative impacts in terms of people's willingness to bridge that gap. But one of the things I think that's a challenge for us today as we move forward is how do we perceive ourselves, and how do we define ourselves? Who are we really? And that has a lot to do with the issue of internalized homophobia. The way that gay people look today is very, very different from the way that gay people looked in the mid-'60s when I was first coming out. There were a handful of people who regularly went to the gym in those days. There wasn't the he-man, gay man in the mid-'60s, but that is the if not the norm, it's certainly the model today. And is that who we really are? And I'm not suggesting it's not. I'm not posing it that a right or wrong, but I think again it has to do with the nature of myth and the nature of reality, and our how we learn to define ourselves in terms of the reality that we internalize about who we are. And another part of that is the degree to which we have in the past and continue to eroticize taboos. I am today and have always been a great lover of pornography. And one of the things that fascinates me about pornography are the things that we identify as being erotic. Physically abusing for the top to physically abuse the bottom is commonly seen as something that's very erotic and very stimulating. What is that about? How have we internalized those myths, if you will? How much do they say about us, and how much do they have to say about the nature of the male of the species in general, again, mythical male that dominates the culture that he's part of, and then also I have been fascinated over the last several decades to watch the degree to which eroticizing even a disease is, and that's nothing that's new. If one reads that during the 18th century, that when syphilis was the great medical scourge caused by sexual intercourse, that transmission of syphilis was seen as something that could be eroticized and was used as an erotic stimulant. And I've because I worked for Stop AIDS Project and before that for many years worked in the area of the HIV world. One of the things I found fascinating was, what this whole concept that you don't hear people talk about it so much anymore, but there was the concept of the bug chaser. And I used to say almost from the beginning that, I wasn't certain if the bug chaser even existed. That I thought it was more that it might be more a question of, again, the making HIV erotic. And so a person who was already HIV positive would identify themselves as HIV negative, because that interaction of allowing somebody to control in that way was a very erotic exercise. So that's my. I would love to open up for discussion or questions, but that was the challenge I guess I wanted to make was. And something that I continue to go through to address all the time is. Who are we really as gay people, and also just as people within our culture and in the community of man, how we identify who we are, and how we identify what truth is, what reality is, and how we internalize those messages. So. Yes.
Well, as you were talking, I immediately thought about how our consciousness is dominated by the way our perceptions are told to us by our brain. What we are seeing is described in our head, and going out in concentric circles, that becomes an agreement about reality that we all have. So at any point, there is the opportunity to change the story.
Right.
And that's happened.
Yes, absolutely.
Demonstrated.
Yeah. And that's a journey,
Yes.
if you will.
And a realization that that's going on.
Right. And I think for myself at any rate, one of the values of GBF has been a context in which to encourage myself to have that journey and a support system for that journey. Thank you. Yes.
I had an interesting experience this week. I went to midnight mass at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, and it was a very liberal service, and a female priest offered the sacrament. And as an ex-Mormon, I always had put the idea of Christianity on to the side a little bit and didn't want to deal with it. And then when she was talking about offering the blood of Christ and the flesh of Christ to the congregation, and after hearing George's talk on vegetarianism or paganism, I realized that you're talking about cannibalism. And I had never really heard that before. And all of a sudden I realized I couldn't even consider that. And I couldn't consider taking the sacrament anymore. And that I was truly become a Buddhist, I suppose. But it was just an interesting experience for me on Christmas Eve.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things that the Romans found offensive about Christianity, was the suggestion of cannibalism, because cannibalism was a taboo in Roman times, and so their religious practices were inherently offensive on a number of different levels, but that was one of the things that was really offensive to the Romans. Yes?
I often think about the kind of the story we all tell ourselves about our past and why we are the way we are. And I often wonder, is it possible to look back at your past and really say what happened, or is who you are now distorting how you look at the past? Because I know in some in psychotherapy you often look at the past and your childhood and what happened and what worked and what didn't work. My question is, can you really know what happened back then, or how you're feeling now distorting how you look at the past?
Yeah, I agree. There was a hand over here, so.
Yeah, I believe, well, first, thank you for your talk. I found it very provocative. And second, I think I read in your biography that you, one of your interests was Jungian dream interpretation, or
I'm sorry?
Jung's dream interpretation, or was that somebody else?
That must have been, that was somebody else.
I'll withdraw my question.
Yes.
You mentioned that you enjoy porn. You're probably not the only guy in this room. And I was just curious what you thought about how that perpetuates myths, and maybe some myths that are really not in the best interest of our gay community.
How
porn perpetuates its own myths, and maybe how that might do it in ways that are really not.
Well, that gets in, that's a broader question of communication in general. Violent computer games. I mean, and on and on and on. And as a matter of fact, one of the many graduate programs that I was involved with over the course of my life was communications theory. I guess I would say that probably by the time somebody gets to watching the porn, that they're already there. And so it's probably not going to have that great of an impact. It's not going to form them. And that pornography, an adult is already sufficiently formed that they're not going to be necessarily polluted, if you will. Communications theory suggests that we're not a tabula rasa, that children are, that children can be influenced by media, but that adults can't be influenced by media. I don't know. I think that indeed I have gotten to the place, and it's probably it shows that I'm getting older. I've gotten to the place that I now watch pornography often from a sociological perspective, and I look at it and think, what does this imagery mean? What does this imagery mean? And I sort of stand outside of it, but it very well may. I think it's probably, in our culture at any rate, it's probably highly unlikely, if not impossible, that there's going to be any change to that. I think that what we can do internally as a community, I think that we can have influence on that. I think that the unfortunate thing is that we as a community tend not to touch stuff like that because it's a little too hot. All of us have had, at least, especially those of us who are older, have had such negative experiences with anybody trying to tell us what things we should be able to internalize and which not. There's others of you in the room, I'm sure, who recall that I remember the first gay dirty novel I read was Jean Genet. so it was only great literature. It wasn't the really just sex for sex sake. It was something that actually had a very deep political and sociological message that was communicating. It's an interesting question. I think one would hope that we as a community in the future would have the courage to come to terms with that. I don't think that we have that courage today, and I don't think that we probably will for a while. Thank you. Yeah.
Just about 3 blocks before I turned my car, there was a taxi or something that I saw, like a little advertisement on top for Hands on Gretel.
Uh-huh.
And they were dressed in military and holding guns.
Right.
It's like Hands on Gretel with a twist.
Right.
And my mind said, what don't we turn into? What aren't we recreating in a different image? I won't go see Batman anymore. It's not the one of my childhood. I won't go see Bond anymore. It's not the one I knew. Everything is just going to a place of sex and violence that, it's just, why are we doing this? But that's the question.
Right. Yes.
I was just thinking about how we create our personal myths, and I think everybody makes sense of their own life, their own situation by creating a narrative that puts it all together in some way.
Right.
And that as we move along in life, maybe what we influence would make us realize that narrative is not working for us, and look for new narratives.
Right.
And that influences how we change.
Right.
And I was just thinking yesterday about the Buddha said that things that we don't want to incorporate into our lives are anger, ignorance, and greed. And yet, when we look around us, the two parties, for instance, one seems to embrace those things and not the alternative, which is compassion and generosity and wisdom. And but I think that we do have the capacity, all of us, to look at, for instance, in this group, to look at Buddhist teachings and so forth, and use that to influence us as we change our narrative.
Yeah,
which is
I agree. And I would go a step further than that and suggest that in our Christian traditions, those same elements exist, and unfortunately, they have been with the manipulation of the myth that those elements have been have been pushed down. It's appalling to me that Christianity today should stand for greed and selfishness. That's not who this mythological creature Jesus was. He was about never turn away another man who needs something. That if a person asks you for something, you open your pocket and you give to them. How do we get from there to here? Again, the shifting the myth in order to suit our contemporary ethics. Thanks. Yes.
One of the advantages that I felt that I had growing up in the 50s as a gay person was that you didn't believe the prevalent stories about gay people. Right. And you otherwise, in the outsider, having a foot in two different worlds.
Right.
That story, that's not me. And so since our story weren't being told
right.
Widely, we kind of had to, forge our own.
Right.
Which I think is a good thing.
Oh no, absolutely. And, it created, among other things, it created an incredible strength, or broke us. I think many of us from that era, recall people that we knew who the suicide rate, I'm guessing, was higher in that era than it is today among gay men and lesbians. Yes.
So I'm kind of wondering from what Peter was just saying, what would be the stories or the myths from that time, from even pre-Stonewall, that would be useful to embellish on, to make mythical, to help dispel the remnants of internalized homophobia, internalized gay oppression that are still inside us today.
Wow. Well, I think that we've heard some of them today. I think that part of the problem is the nature of the beast that often like ourselves. I recall that when I was in my 20s, I was not particularly interested in hearing anything that anyone who was over 30 had to say about anything. I don't think that that's a lot different today. I think it's difficult to impart wisdom to other people. I think that, but I think that we have made incredible progress with creating a sense of community. I remember what the gay and lesbian community looked like in Los Angeles in the early 70s. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Gay and Lesbian Center in Los Angeles today, but it's a behemoth agency. It's over $30 million agency with dozens of social programs for everyone across the map. And back then it was a place where down at heels drag queens went to get whatever mental health treatment. It was so it's phenomenal to see the progress that has been made in the creation of a sense of community and responsibility for taking care of the community. I think we have a long way to go with all that, though. I think, and there's nothing natural. I don't think that's part of it. There's nothing. I think it's much easier for a community that has children and grandchildren to create that sense of, well, I'm responsible for the people who come after. Generally, we're not interested in the younger generation unless it's some sort of predatory interest. Yes.
It wasn't until I read The Harry Hay Radically Gay that I felt my lineage. And it's that combination of the gay identity that's infused with a spiritual search and a contribution to society from that perspective. What do we have to offer the world?
Right.
That was when I went, oh, there's my lineage.
Right.
So that's the myth that I tapped into for me.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm even sitting in this room.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that's why all of us are here. It's how do we take what we have here outside? I don't have an answer to that question. I was for a while, before I left to go to Northern California, I was involved with an organization called, God, now I'm not going to remember the name of it, Community Something Initiative. But the point of it was to create a sense of community. And but it's just not an easy thing to do. And we do it on an individual basis, but to do it on an institutional basis is not an easy thing to do.
I think one example of a really successful project was the It Gets Better thing that Dan Savage started. It just exploded across the globe. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So, I'm natively a pessimist, I think, but so I well, that was sad, the use of the new, 21st century.
Right. Yeah, right.
I recently read a novel by Bruein called A Sense of an Ending, and it's very brief, elegantly written, and it's a quick read, but it's totally devastating in that the guy discovers that the story that he had about his best friend falling in love with his girlfriend, and he remembered that he had sort of given them his blessing, and then 4 years later he's shown a letter that he had sent to the boyfriend, and it's full of malice and savage snark, and that had devastating impact to the people around who received that letter. And he had no memory of that.
Yeah.
And you don't remember the good things we do, but it's amen. I mean, how many have we conveniently edited out some bad behavior from our account to ourselves?
Yeah.
I think the chance is likely. But then there's, from a Buddhist point of view, maybe none of this stuff is essential. Where do myths play if you're just being present? Are you in a mythological trance? I don't think so. I don't think that's what mindfulness is hyper-identification with a mythology. I think it's sort of, well, I don't know. What do you think? I mean, when you're feeling most present, are you present as someone with a biographical story, or are you just a sentient being who's alert? I mean, it can't be either one, but I think the challenge of Buddhist teaching is that the storyline we think is true is probably never the whole truth. I mean, even gender, even sexual preference, gender, how deeply does that penetrate into our spiritual radar and sensitive? I don't know.
I think for myself it depends upon the audience. Mm-hmm. If I'm speaking with people who know me really, really well, it's very different than if I'm speaking with somebody that I just met. I think that I probably sanitize the story substantially when I'm dealing with somebody that my journey has been much more noble.
Well, it's like going to college. You have a long story, and by the end it says, I'm fine. No story. We have time for a couple more questions. I have a question. How many of you, you don't have to say what it is, how many of you have thought about a New Year's resolution? Pretty optimistic bunch.
Yes.
Hey Bob, thanks. When you were executive director at Stop AIDS, looking backwards, would have been anything different you would have done being executive director?
Was what any
when you were executive director, was anything you would do differently now, looking back in hindsight about what was going on in the case at that time? I'm not looking for regrets. I'm just looking forward.
No, I know. It had an incredible impact on me. Not necessarily for the reasons I would have wanted, but even bad things. As a matter of fact, in my experience, often adversity is the thing that we learn the most from. And as you know, some very bad things happened to me while I was there, and and I learned amazing things from that experience, amazing growth of compassion for other people and understanding of other people, patience that I didn't have before. I'm much less I'm a much less arrogant person. I'm still pretty goddamn arrogant, but I'm much less arrogant than I was before I went to work there.
Oh,
Yes.
Hi. You mentioned a couple of things, and there are a couple of things that were said I thought were kind of interesting. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about planting seeds of compassion, planting seeds of joy and happiness, and reflecting on the past, things that have, past transgressions, past behavior, and that sort of thing. What I'm hearing Thich Nhat Hanh say is that we use mindfulness as a way of bathing those experiences in the light of mindfulness. And in so doing, we actually transform them. He talks about transforming garbage into a lotus. So the experiences that I had in the past that have been negative, or even it was talked about in psychotherapy, we work on early childhood traumas. Maybe parents were physically, emotionally, psychologically abusive. Our environments might have been that way. And what Ty is, I understand what Ty is inviting me to, first of all, plant seeds of joy and happiness, bring those up, and when I have sufficient ability to turn back and look at that stuff, I can convert that garbage into a lotus.
Yeah.
So, and I think about that because part of my job, of course, is working with children, and so there is a lot of pain being, in the role that I am. I work with children. I work with them privately, individually, and the concept of gay men as predators, and we kind of brought up that issue around predators. That's an extremely painful thing to walk around with in my capacity, and to think about, my God, this is the mindset. So I really appreciate that. Also the issue around porn, pornography, and the precepts talk about the sexuality. So I really get a chance to look back on my life and say, I really do get to bathe that in the light of mindfulness, and continue to water the right seeds, because obviously the seeds that develop are the ones that we water. Right. So I'm just wondering how you think about it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's and mindfulness, I guess, is the key to all of it. That it's so easy for us to just fall into our ruts and approach reality or our history from the same perspective, and to be mindful and to be able to look at it and say, well, there was so much more going on here than just my pain. That there were all these other things going on, and I need to pull out those seeds, as you suggested, that are these are the things I need to cultivate, not my sense of being wronged.
So you spoke about truth and myths. I'm just going back to your comment about porn, and does porn perpetuate a myth?
Right.
For me, where I went with that question, and I've been sitting here with it a little bit, is does it perpetuate a myth that in order for sex to be sexy or hot, it needs to look like that?
Absolutely.
It needs to be polished and every muscle glistening.
Yes.
And does it need to be that shiny?
Yeah.
Or can it just be average?
Yeah, and that's part of it. I mean, and that goes beyond porn. I mean, in American culture, if you look at American movies and European movies, the models for what is a romantic couple in a German or Danish or Norwegian movie, and what's a romantic couple in the U.S., they're worlds apart. And that's very much part of our pathology, if you will, that, boy, we got to polish this stuff up. We have to make it marketable. It's more than just this.
People have started to create porn with just
yes.
average people
in
the scene.
And it's hot, isn't it?
I think we have to bring this provocative to Wow, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Announcements. We have a host.
I'm your host for the first time, and like a virgin. And there are snacks on the table, and there's hot water for tea. And if you have tea, please wash your cup with soap and dry it, put it in your wrap when you're done. I will be going around with the Donna Bowl, and that is to support this Sangha, the expenses, and I suggest the donation is $5 to $8. More or less will be accepted and appreciated. If you're here for the first time and you would like to be on the mailing list, you can sign up out in the lobby. There's a sheet there. Please give your home address and your email address. And finally, usually after the half-hour social, people will gather outside the main door for going to lunch. Several people may go, and you're welcome. Everyone's welcome to join in.
Is this the last Sunday for free parking?
Yes, and I was just going to talk about that. Okay, the city, the bankrupt San Francisco city, has decided to start charging for parking on Sundays from noon to 6. So this is the last free Sunday of parking at the meters. The good thing is that you can pre-deposit. When you get here, you can pay for your half hour or an hour, and it won't start to toll until noon. But it's important to remember to do that. One solution to the coin problem is to get a SFMTA parking card. They come in $20 and $50, and you can just stick them in and you see the time go by, and then you pull it out when it's done. They look like this. You can get them hardware stores. You can check. I have a couple of addresses here for local stores around this area if you live in the East Bay and don't have a chance to get a San Francisco one. There is at Cole Hardware at 29th and at Sapphire Photo at 24th. These are all in Mission. And Siegel's Clothing at 19th in Mission. You can get these cards, which are very handy.
And probably online.
Yes, and you can order them from the SFMTA, and they'll just mail them to you. Jerry?
Will credit cards also work in
I
this?
think so.
Yes.
Yes.
I think you could also pay online. For the theater, I did it a couple weeks
Oh,
ago.
really?
Yeah. So with if you have a smartphone or
Oh, well, that's way beyond me. Okay. But just don't worry about what you're going to say. Yes, those. Yes, yes.
As of last week, a small group of us have decided to, as part of the new year, to do a meditation as a group virtually at like 9:15 on Thursdays. So this will be a small group of us and meditate for 20 minutes and a few minute shares amongst us. So if anyone's interested in participating in that, you can let me know. That's gonna,
That would be a good announcement to put up on the listserv. Any of you who are not getting emails from GBF announcements, if you go to gaybuddhist.org, right on the front page, down at the bottom, you can click and it will lead you to where you can sign up to the Yahoo, the GBF Yahoo group. And it's a great way to get information, and there will be stuff like that. To tune into. Anything else? Okay, thanks again, Bob. Let's get in the circle.
I know this we all are very slow about getting that one.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.